get started. We have a really great presentation for you today. Quickly, my name is Laurel Ackerman. I am the marketing director at Elastio. I am here today to host this webinar. I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping notes before I turn it over for the main event. Everybody who signed up for the webinar will receive a link to the recording afterwards that you can view and share with your team. We also, this is a live broadcast, so we will have an opportunity at the end of the presentation for Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions to make sure that we see them all and can answer them. You should find that typically at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom control panel. And I think that is it. And so with that, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Protecting Your AWS Data from the Ransomware Pandemic. And I am going to hand it over to our speakers. You'll be hearing from Elastio's VP of Strategic Alliances, Todd Frederick. You'll be hearing from Ashok Mahajan from AWS, and Eshwar Nalamaru, who is Elastio's Product Director. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Todd.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it very much. Ashok and Eshwar, thank you for joining me today. We're excited to have you guys on the call today to kind of walk through how we can help protect your S3 environments from the threats of malware and ransomware. It's become somewhat of a hot topic. So I'm going to take just a couple of moments and kind of tee up the conversation as we look through, before we get into the technical deep dive of S3, how to best use it and manage it. And then Eshwar will go ahead and kind of talk about how we can look to protect that, the AWS S3 service. Well, at Elastio, one of the first things that we kind of talk about is what we call the 5 myths of ransomware protection. And, we kind of consider these things myths because it's not one thing that can make you safe from a ransomware or malware attack. It's actually a combination of things. So, for example, perimeter security or endpoint security alone does not eliminate my risk of ransomware. Anomaly detection is very popular, but it's only a single pillar in the battle. Right? It's one of many. There's been a lot of talk about how to make backups immutable and air gap them to make sure that they're protected and immune from ransomware. But that alone does not give you the full protection that you might need. Legacy solutions, whatever they may be, don't always protect you. And finally, one of the things that we talk a lot about is the shared responsibility model with AWS, where we talk about is the cloud secure? It's in and of itself. Just moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily secure my data. You have to take steps, and you're responsible to take some steps as well. It's part of that shared responsibility model. And why do we think these are myths? Well, because combined, ransomware is still getting through. It's a pandemic inside of not only cloud, but also on-prem. Here's a couple of industry insights that we talk about and we talk through when we talk to customers about ransomware. 21 days is the average downtime to completely remunerate from a ransomware attack. And in 95% of the incidents, it's not known how the bad actors attained the initial access to the organization. Probably most relevant here to this conversation is that only 65% of the encrypted data was able to be recovered if and when a ransom was paid. As we know, cybercrime continues to increase. It's on everybody's mind. It's a board level discussion. People are trying to look at what they can do to protect themselves. And, right now it's a $10 trillion business, and it's not going away. And so at least 86% of organizations have had at least one user try to connect to a phishing site. So again, it continues to be out there. We continue to look for solutions to kind of mitigate the problem. So we're happy at Elastio to announce the extension of our ransomware and malware scanning to AWS S3. Just to give you a little background on what Elastio does from a technology perspective, we reverse engineered over 2,200 families of ransomware, scanning over 10,000 different types of variants of those 2,200 forms of ransomware. And by reverse engineering this and building a detonation model, we have this ability to identify not just anomalies or interesting characteristics that's happening in your storage and your backups, but we actually are able to identify specific files that are infected with specific variants. We have over 99.9% accuracy in our scanning, and to date, it's 3 billion scans plus, and every day there's more and more as people join Elastio. We also offer, just so everybody knows, scanning protection. In addition to S3, we can help scan and detect instances in EC2, EBS, EKS, and EFS, as well as AWS Backup and their recovery points. What's interesting is to play a little bit on the AWS Backup and Backup recovery points is about 6 months ago, AWS and Elastio announced a integration of our ransomware detection and scanning engine for AWS Backup. And we wrote some code, they wrote some code, and you can read about it in the AWS marketplace. But the idea was that we can now look at and ingest and scan the AWS backups for indicators of compromise, indicators of detonation of ransomware to ensure the recoverability. And this has really become an exciting better together type of opportunity where we're working hand in hand, helping protect our customers' data and making it resilient and recoverable quickly in the case of a ransomware attack. We are also partnered with Amazon as a storage competency partner. Our solutions have been reviewed as part of the Well Architect program, and we love to transact with AWS together in the marketplace. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ashok, and you can walk us through S3 and everything it has to offer.
Thanks, Rod. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashok Mahajan, and I'm a senior partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services. I am part of the global startup team that focuses on ISVs, especially our partners in security segment. And I've been associated with information security community throughout my career, and I've been closely associated with identity access, application security, and data protection. I think let's begin the conversation looking at the perspective of data and its evolution over the years, right? From the very beginning of humanity to year 2003, only half a zettabyte of data was created. In 2013, it took only 2 days to create that amount of data, and the pace has been growing exponentially. In 2018, global data was estimated to be 33 zettabytes. Industry analysis firm IDC expects that data to grow to nearly 175 zettabytes by 2025. To put that into perspective, 1 zettabyte is equivalent to trillion gigabytes, and that's a lot of data. Now, we are thinking why this is important. This growth presents a huge challenge to a lot of organizations, CIOs, storage administrators, basically companies of all size and all industries. And that's not it. Let's say your business grows by 5 times, whether it's 40 terabytes or 400 terabytes in the next few years. How would your business handle that growth? What basically customers and organizations are looking for at this stage is simple, cost-effective, centralized way to protect and manage their data at scale. Next slide. One of the most important decisions a business owner will make is where to store the data and what type of storage is required. And in today's era, it's not like one storage fits all, meets all the requirements. This is why AWS provides the most comprehensive set of cloud storage services for object, block, and file to meet your specific needs. Over the last few years, we have built a rich set of data services. Either services include AWS Backup, Transfer Family, or capabilities within our primary storage like intelligent tiering. Amazon Simple Storage Service, or also commonly known as Amazon S3, is an object storage service that offers industry-leading scalability, data availability, security, and performance. It allows you to secure and protect your data for a range of use cases, such as data lakes, websites, cloud-native application, backup, archive, even machine learning and analytics. By consolidating all of that data in one place, it makes AWS Data Lake an excellent foundation for artificial intelligence and even machine learning use cases, scenarios like data used in high-performance computing environment, or even just large big data analytics application. Amazon Elastic Block Storage, short for EBS, is an easy-to-use, scalable, highly performance block storage service designed for Amazon Elastic Compute, or also known as Amazon EC2. AWS Backup enables you to centralize and automate data protection across AWS services and offer a cost-effective, fully managed, policy-based service that further simplifies data protection at scale. It also helps you meet your regulatory and compliance needs for data protection. When you have to think about sharing data without provisioning the storage, you can use Amazon EFS. For transfer and migration, you can use AWS Data Sync, AWS Transfer Family. And I think in scenarios where there is a lack of consistent network connectivity, you even have AWS Snow Family. For today's conversation, we will be focusing on S3 and the security best practices around S3. Next slide. With Amazon S3, you can store data across a range of different storage classes, purpose-built for your specific use case and access pattern. For data with changing, unknown, or unpredictable access pattern, such as data lakes, analytics, or even when you are launching a new application, use S3 intelligent tiering, which automatically moves data to the most cost-effective access tier based on access frequency without performance impact, retrieval fees, or even operational overhead. For more predictable access pattern, you can use you can basically store your mission critical application data in S3 standard for frequent access. You can accelerate performance critical application by storing your most frequent access data in S3 Express One Zone, which can improve data access speed by 10 times and reduce cost by 50% compared to S3 standard. You can save cost by storing infrequent access data in S3 standard IEA or One Zone IEA, and archive data at lowest cost in archival storage class like S3 Glacier. If you have data residency requirement that can't be met by an existing AWS region, you can use the S3 Outpost storage class to store your S3 data on premises using S3 on Outpost. Next slide. Designing and deploying data protection solutions, more specifically a cloud-centric backup and recovery solution, is more complicated than ever before. If we define data protection, it is basically a process of safeguarding important data from corruption, compromise, or loss, and providing the capability to store the data to a functional state in order to maintain business continuity. One of the key goals of many organizations is to minimize the time to recover when any type of data loss happens, and also to minimize the amount of data that is lost. All these strategies also need to consider cost as a key consideration. The key business risk to be considered when setting the recovery point objective and recovery time objective of your data is also very important in the decision-making process. Now, in the next slide, let's talk about security, which is the highest priority at AWS. And when it comes to security, we basically follow a shared responsibility model where AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, the physical infrastructure, facilities, and the actual compute and building block that run all the AWS services. Todd, in the beginning, highlighted about this when we started the conversation. So in this model, for you as a customer, you are basically responsible for security in the cloud, which means you secure your workload and application that you deploy onto the cloud and have the flexibility to put more emphasis on security of sensitive data and adjust as needed in areas where you have less concern. You own and are responsible for managing your data, including encryption options, classifying your assets, and using the appropriate IAM permissions to manage access. Specifically, when it comes to S3, AWS provides you with tools, features, and best practices to securely store your data, share it, and even audit your data in Amazon S3. You can secure your data both in transit and at rest with encryption. You can grant and restrict access to the data using IAM and S3 bucket policies. And you can audit your data securely using the best practices that are in place. Now let's dive into some of these features that AWS provides in the next few slides. Well, when we talk about encryption in S3, we have few options. You can encrypt your client-side data with AWS Encryption SDK, and you can even encrypt your data in transit, and S3 provides multiple options for encrypting your data at rest. When you think about your data encryption, things that are very common that comes to your mind are compliance, best practices, how do I protect my data from cloud providers, other customer, and how do I protect my data from cloud provider itself? What everyone really means is to have control of the keys that are needed for decryption and to prevent unauthorized physical access to plain text data. When we talk about encrypting your data at rest with S3, The difference really lies between how you manage your master key. For example, in SSE S3, AWS handles the key rotation and is a very popular and in fact, the default encryption configuration for every bucket in Amazon S3. Now, if you have your own corporate standards around how do you want to do key rotation, how do you want to manage keys and the objects in the bucket, you can basically use AWS Key Management Service as well. When you want to store your own encryption keys, you can even use server-side encryption with customer-provided keys, also known as SSE-C. Next slide. In S3, there are multiple ways to grant access to your data. Like we talked about just a bit ago, you can use IAM policies or even bucket policies as well. You use IAM when you prefer to keep access control policies in IAM environment and control all AWS services. When you think about IAM, think about what can this user do in AWS? Which S3 action can this IAM user or IAM role perform under certain conditions? Whereas when you want to use bucket policy, you prefer to keep access control policies in S3 environment. In those scenarios, you think about who can access this S3 resource, which IAM user or role can access this bucket. Another useful tool to help you manage your access in S3 are access points. When you have S3 bucket and have different user groups that you want to grant different level of access, instead of managing one huge bucket policy, you can actually use access point. You can think of access point as dividing your buckets into multiple namespaces, and these are especially useful to simplify access management for shared or multi-tenant bucket. We see this a lot in a data lake scenario where some users need access to some of the data and others need access to a different part of the data within the same bucket. Another mechanism is boundary enforcement. AWS service control policies, or SCP as commonly known as, are a great example of how to create these boundaries. For example, let's say your company is based in US and have decided that they only want resources to be created in US West 2 and US East 2. You can easily create an SCP that would prevent anyone in your organization from creating an AWS resource in other regions. Basically a boundary that no one can cross. Next slide. When it comes to data protection, there are some specific scenarios and specific features AWS provide. To begin with, I'll talk about Amazon S3 object log, which is basically used to store immutable objects using a write once, a read many model. It can help you prevent objects from being deleted or overwritten for a fixed amount of time or indefinitely. You can use S3 object log to meet your regulatory requirements, especially in finance or healthcare sector that require warm storage, or even just to add an extra layer of protection against accidental changes and deletion. You can use S3 versioning feature to preserve, retrieve, and store every version of object in your bucket. Versioning in Amazon S3 is a means of keeping multiple variants of a same object in the bucket so that you can recover easily from both unintended user action and even application failures. S3 replication is an automatic and asynchronous process that makes identical copies of your data, retaining all that metadata from the source object, including the object creation time, date, and version ID. You can replicate objects to a single destination bucket or to multiple destination buckets, and that destination buckets can be in different region or within the same region as your source bucket. Next slide. We talked about security, but sometimes just setting the right security is not enough. You need to periodically verify that those settings are working as required. Monitoring is an important part of maintaining the reliability, availability, and performance of Amazon S3 and your AWS solution. AWS Trusted Advisor is an online tool that provides you real-time guidance to help you provision your resources following AWS best practices. In relation to Amazon S3, Trusted Advisor checks logging configuration of Amazon S3 buckets, performs security check for S3 bucket that have open access permission, and fault tolerance checks for S3 bucket that do not have versioning enabled or even have versioning suspended. AWS Configs allows you to assess, audit, and evaluate the configuration of your AWS resources against desired secure configuration. For S3, AWS Config provides checks for public read and write access, checks whether versioning, logging, replication, or even encryption is enabled or not, and a check to make sure your buckets are configured to only allow HTTPS or TLS connections. To help you manage the security posture of your organization's Amazon S3 data, Amazon Macy provides you with the inventory of your S3 buckets and automatically evaluates and monitors the bucket for security and access control. Macy automates discovery and reporting of sensitive data, and if Macy detects a potential issue with the security, remediate as necessary. Monitoring configuration is definitely important, but to audit your S3 usage, you need logging. You can record the actions that are taken by users, role, or AWS services on these S3 resources and maintain log records for auditing and even compliance purposes. To do this, you can use Amazon S3 server access logs or AWS Cloudflare logs, or even combination of both. Another important feature that AWS provide is Amazon S3 storage lens that delivers organization-wide visibility into object storage, usage, trends, and makes actionable recommendation to optimize cost and apply data protection best practices for your S3 buckets. It basically delivers more than 60 different metrics, which includes both free and advanced metrics on S3 usage and activity to an interactive dashboard in the S3 console. And when it comes to security, along with these native AWS services and features, we have a very strong network of AWS partners with deep expertise and specialized solutions to meet your specific needs. By leveraging AWS services along with partner solutions like Elastio's ransomware and malware scanning for S3, you extend the benefits of AWS and utilize the latest security technology and solution that meets your organization's security and compliance needs. Now let's hear from Ishwar how Elastio helps you get flexible, automated, and comprehensive ransomware and malware protection across all of your data, including S3.
Thanks, Ashok, for elaborating on the best practices as well as the tools which Amazon provides so that our customers are secure. And now I'll talk about how ransomware and malware is a threat vector, followed by how Elastio comes into picture, and then protect you against malware or ransomware for your S3 buckets. Coming to how S3 can act as a threat vector, there are primarily two ways in which S3, an object in S3 could be a threat vector. The first one is that could be an entry point. For example, somebody got access to your bucket, they put some payload in that malware payload. If that malware payload is attached to any EC2 instance, or the EC2 instance picks it up, that is when it'll become a threat vector. And that is how it'll start spreading across, like your lateral spread across your organizations, etc. So S3 is an entry point here. And then the second way is S3 as a distribution point. For example, like let's say in your code somewhere you have an object which you put in S3 which are used by multiple people. And let's say somebody put some malware payload in that object. So at that point, what really happens is this payload is picked up by multiple users across your organizations, or they could also be end users in some cases. So when that happens, essentially malware is getting distributed from your S3 bucket to multiple people, either inside an organization or outside an organization. Now let's discuss why we need malware and ransomware scanning. We understood how it can act as a threat vector and what are the different use cases for it. So now coming to the end result is essentially you'll be liable to your end user, or your organization will get business disruption. Either your customers will get business disruption, or you will be getting business disruption. And the several use cases for this scanning, okay, where can you use the scanning feature? So the first thing is when you're migrating to a cloud, let's say you have your loads on-prem and then you're migrating to your cloud, AWS. And when you're starting your environment, you want to ensure that you're starting it clean. And there are several customers who really want to scan their data and then start fresh with a clean environment in their AWS. And then second is compliance requirements. So either it could be a compliance requirements internally, or it could be regulatory requirements. There are companies who really want to scan their data every 1 year, or every quarter. They just want to scan all the data in their S3 bucket just to make sure that everything is clean. And then the third is content protection. So in many of the cases, we have seen customers where a customer who they cannot see the end user data, but they just want to make sure that the end user data, what is being uploaded into their portals is clean. That is when they can use this tool and then make sure that, okay, everything is clean here. There's no malware risk for the end user. You can be assured that we have scanned for everything. And then the fourth use case is data pipelines, especially if you're talking about uh, like data lakes and everything. You're pulling your data from multiple sources. You just want to ensure that all the data which you're getting is from, like, you will make sure that it's from authentic sources, but also ensure that your data which you're collecting is free of malware or ransomware payloads which you have. And similarly, if you're working with multiple third parties, and then you're integrating with them for pulling the data in, that is where you can use this S3 malware and ransomware scanning. To our next slide. Yeah, now coming to how Elastio scans your S3 buckets. So let's start from deployment and then talk about what are the various functionality which Elastio offers here. So Elastio deploys with a CFN and operates completely within your VPC agentlessly. So what do you mean by like completely operates within your VPC? Your data is never transferred out of your VPC. So your data is always sitting inside. The only scan metadata of, like, let's say, okay, this is the path where we found a malware. Only that data is pulled in, but not the object itself. It's just the metadata of the object which is pulled out to the Elastio tenant for where you can see on the UI, or you can send it to your various ticketing tools or security tools, etc. And each scan in Elastio S3 case happens as an AWS batch job with spot instances. So there won't be any static instance which is running continuously, which will increase your cost in many cases. So in our case, we trigger a spot instance every time, and then we can reduce the cost by doing this. Like whenever it is required, we just use that. Otherwise, we kill the instance. And when a scan is triggered, what Elastio internally does is Elastio lists all your objects and then scans the objects based on filters. And what are the filters which we really offer is essentially, like, let's say we already scanned these objects, don't scan these, scan only new objects, or scan maybe objects with particular prefixes or paths. So you have all those optionality built into Elastio. And once we gather all the list of objects, what we essentially do is we mount S3, and then we scan those objects which are required based on the policy which you have set, or maybe an on-demand scan which you have set there. And here, one more point to note here is Elastio scans are smart enough not to download your entire object every time. For example, like let's say you have a 500 GB of object, we might not require everything. The engine is smart enough just to pick up the bytes which are required and not download the entire content of it. So next slide. Okay, coming to the architecture of this one, everything on the right side in the red box is essentially operating within your VPC. This is where the CFN is deploying some resources which are required for scanning. And once we essentially, we assume a read-only role on the S3 bucket, which will essentially pick up all the objects which we want to scan, mount it back, and then you'll have the scanned results, which will be pushed to the Elastio Cyber Cloud or Elastio tenant, where you can see the result, and later on push it to other ticketing tools or any security tools which you have. And the scan options which we provide today is like you can either schedule a scan on a regular interval, or you can also trigger an on-demand scan whenever it's required. You feel like there is some security threat vector which got triggered by your security team. That's when you can also trigger an on-demand scan. Next, yeah. Okay, when it comes to Elastio, what differentiates us? So this an overall slide talking about like not just S3 but beyond S3, why Elastio is the preferred solution. So within AWS right now, Elastio is the only solution which has actually reverse engineered, like as Todd pointed out, more than 2,200 strains or families of ransomware. And then we can precisely detect, okay, this file or this folder got ransomware encrypted. So no other solution can do it today. And we can also directly integrate with AWS Backup recovery points. For example, you're protecting your EC2 or EBS with AWS Backup. Whenever that recovery point is hitting the vault, Elastio can pick it up and directly scan it. And then if you want, we can push the result to either AWS Security Hub or any other platform which you want. Similarly, we can pick up EBS snapshots as soon as they get created. If they're tagged with Elastio tags, we'll pick up and then scan them. And similarly, you can do the same thing for EBS and EFS. And when it comes to specific to S3 here, we can either scan existing objects, or you can also scan the objects which are being new objects which are created from today onwards once you set a policy. And partial bucket scanning, what do we mean by that? Essentially, you don't have to choose, let's say you have a very big bucket and you don't want to essentially scan everything. What you can actually do is, like, you can put the time filters on it. For example, just scan the objects which were created or modified between this time interval. Or you can also talk about, okay, just scan these particular parts, or like prefixes or globs. You have multiple options there. You can just do partial bucket scanning. And the other thing which a point to note here is also about like scan on object creation. So what I'm talking about is, as soon as you upload an object to, or like something to your S3 bucket, immediately Elastio will pick up and scan it. That feature we're currently working on it, and it'll be coming soon. And then what we have also seen is there are also so we don't have any limitation on object size as such. So if 5 TB is the limit of the S3 object, so we can go to that limit. We don't have any restrictions on object size limitations as such. So if you're more interested to learn about this one, so we offer a 30-day free trial. You can schedule a briefing or email Todd for any other information which you want, or you can get started on our AWS Marketplace, or contact Elastio. We can provide or help you in any way possible.
Thank you, Iswar. It's a great presentation. Thank you, Ashok. Great content for everybody. I guess at this point, we'd love to open it up for any questions that you guys have. You can simply put the questions inside the Q&A pop-up, and they'll end up in our queue here, and we can kind of go through that. While we're waiting, for that, Ashok, when you talk a lot about S3, what are some of the more typical applications you see? One of the things that as Iswar kind of mentioned, we're seeing a lot of cloud migrations where the S3 bucket is the primary repository for that on-prem data, as these companies make their journey to the cloud. Do you have any particular thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think S3 is a very robust, storage and object storage, right? We have seen scenarios like people using it for basically defining the static websites. People are using it for data lakes. We are using it for backups, archive, even their machine learning and analytics use case as well, right? And especially when we talk about migration from on-prem, right? We have scenarios like AWS Data Sync and other transfer families to migrate data. And even if, let's say, you're still on-prem and you want to use the benefit of cloud storage, you have storage gateways that you can leverage. So AWS, from that perspective, provides a lot of flexibility and a lot of different options based on your specific needs and your specific requirements.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions we have here is, I think this is probably directed to Iswar, performance, right? So, Iswar, how quickly can Elastio scan an S3 bucket?
Well, we already have a slide for it, Todd. If you just go 2 slides after this one, we can show it. Okay, so the scan performance really depends on the size of the object or the file which you're uploading into your S3 bucket. So the larger the file, obviously, we can scan more data, I would say. The reason being, as I mentioned, we're smart enough just to pick up the bytes which we require. And you can see the numbers here. So it's essentially it's less than like 1 cent per gigabyte whenever you scan it. And the throughput ranges from like anywhere like 50,000 to 100,000 per hour, depending on the object size which you have.
Right. Performance is is always a critical component, as well as cost, right? That's another important component. Let's see. Are there any other questions? Let's see. Okay, so I guess this is kind of a soak to you. What capabilities does Amazon S3 have or capabilities does S3 provide to protect the data from accidental or malicious deletes?
Yeah. So I think we talked about it in one of the slides as well, right? Things like S3 object versioning, S3 replication, and even S3 object logs are all these optional features that you can enable to add additional data protection beyond the durability that S3 provides. I'm sure most of the audience member are familiar, right? That S3 provides 11 nines of data durability. So all these features basically stress the importance of that so that you can preserve and keep your data protected.
Great. It really is a great repository for large amounts of data. Iswar, to you, how does Elastio stay on top of ransomware and add to the model?
Okay, great. So that's a great question. So we have a team of researchers who actively go out and then get the data on ransomware. And right now, we are really at a stage where we're seeing ransomwares which are not on the market. We are like almost like 3 to 6 months ahead of what is available in the market for the ransomware players. If you have heard of like RAS, it's like people really sell ransomware as a service. So just like how Amazon is selling their services, there are also people who sell ransomware. And we have researchers who really go deep and then gather the data, which from multiple places. We cannot name the particular sources as such, but we do gather the data and constantly update our model. Every day our model gets updated. And just to give some the rough idea of this one, every week we see anywhere from like 20 to 30 different kinds of ransomware which we see in the market. And when we test out with our algorithm, which we have currently, most of the weeks we cover everything, but sometimes we might miss at max like 2 or 3 of them. Because our model is also like a statistical model, we can definitely tweak it so that we can improve that efficiency. It's not completely AI based. So we also have some statistical model which can actually help us to improve the efficiency of that, because we know exactly where it's going wrong, and we pick up those and then we improve our model.
No, thank you for that. It's interesting when you talk about ransomware as a service companies. These are actually, companies out there with employees, with payroll, with healthcare out there, continuing to manufacture these threats and infecting it, getting paid, by the ransom paid. It's just crazy times. We have a couple more minutes. If there's any other questions, we'd like to give you back a little bit of this time. Do we have anybody else that would like to ask a question to either myself, Iswar, or Ashok? Okay. Well, I think that ends it today. I want to say thank you, Ashok. Great presentation. Thank you for joining us from AWS. We're big fans, and I really am proud and happy with the partnership that we have together, solving this issue for our customers together. Iswar, your technical knowledge is great. Thank you for walking through everybody the threat vectors, and Laurel, thank you for getting this set up and getting a great bunch of attendees. And for everybody, just in case, just last question, if anyone would like to schedule a private briefing, go over their environment a little more in detail, you can visit us at elastio.com. Feel free to send me an email, todd@elastio.com, or just go to the AWS Marketplace and you could start a trial and start scanning your environment today for no cost. So if there's no further questions, we will end this webinar, and thank you everybody for your time. Thank you for attending, and have a great day and a great rest of your week.